in 314 for a shooting at Century Theaters. They're saying somebody's shooting in the auditorium.
Roger, keep your fires west of the smoke. You're cleared hot. An officer hit. Send me the world.
Don't go over that fence. Don't go over that fence. Grab the shotgun again.
Welcome to Tactical Tangents.
Welcome back to Tactical Tangents. This is Mike. This episode is brought to you by Loa Boots. Start your day off on the right foot with footwear that was designed for those who stand relentlessly in the face of adversity. I wear Loa every single day, for miles on canine searches and for hours on tactical operations in inclement weather. No matter what, Loa keeps me moving. Whether you run, hike, hunt, or fight, on the streets or out in the woods, Loa has the gear you need to help you conquer whatever challenges you face. Go check out their new line of trail running shoes at Loa Boots, L-O-W-A Boots.com, and get outside for some fresh air and daylight. Loa, for those who know where they're going and won't stop until they get there.
And this is Jim. This episode is also brought to you by ManusX. We've talked a lot about the tactical fantasy on this podcast, and one of the quickest ways to break your tactical fantasies and actually improve your performance is by getting real feedback. One of the ways you can do that is with ManusX. You're not going to get better at shooting on your own. You need practice, data, and coaching. And you need to make the most of your ammo with good live and dry fire training. Manus is a family of training devices that tracks you while you train. It times and tracks everything you do in a drill and coaches you as you go. It is indispensable to taking your shooting to the next level. Go find them on manusx.com. All right, so back in the day, we were in a we were in a flying squadron, and we had just shifted missions. We'd shifted from kind of an herbivore mission to kind of a carnivore mission, close air support, that kind of thing.
And I want to make sure we're clear. We're not talking about Tac Tangents was in that mission so much as Jim doing his flying stuff.
There it was, balls deep, doing this mission, right? And
your friendly podcast host. We're in the mish, hacking the mish, flying a gunship or whatever it was.
So this is at work. And a dude I really respect, a high quality, high credibility, high time weapons school, patch, Top Gun, all that, whatever guy, comes back from one of our first deployments in this mission, right? And he's fired up. Things went right, things went wrong, and he's on the jazz. You can kind of tell he's on the jazz. And he sits down with me. I was chief of tactics in the squadron at the time, and he's like, Jim, we got to start enforcing the standard. We got to start holding guys to the standard and enforcing the standard. And I'm like, that's great, bud. Have you written down the standard? What is the standard? I would love to know what the standard is because I'd like to teach them the standard. And he's like, yeah, it's on SharePoint. And what he was talking about was on SharePoint, which is where we load up documents and stuff, like a Google Drive kind of thing. There were something like 78 billion little PowerPoint presentations made by vendors that built different widgets that we had now strapped to the airplane. And not a single goddamn one of them was a standard. And there was no version control to them. They were just like random briefings that we had collected in this like SharePoint hell. and so I turned to him. I'm like, dude, bro. We don't have a standard. What we have is an Indian legend passed from father to son, And I can't hold people to that. It's not realistic for me to hold people to that. And that was like a light bulb moment for him, which is kind of funny. And I've thought about ever since then, what the hell we mean when we say standards. We got to have some standards. A PT test, it's a standard. That's why we have it, is because we got to have some standards around here. It's like, well, yeah, we do. But I've noticed the word standards kind of changes depending on where you are. And a big theme on Tactical Tangents, this program, this project, is that rules matter. And rules are a big part of being a tactical practitioner, right? Whether you are law enforcement, military, civilian concealed carrier, prepper, whatever you are, your relationship with and your attitude toward rules matters. And so we talk about that. That's many of our episodes are about this topic, and there's a reason for it. And we also talk about how it's kind of context dependent. It depends a lot on who you are and where you are, and you got to kind of read the room a little bit about how you approach rules and what rules matter and what rules don't, and when to enforce them and when to kind of look the other way a little bit. And that's tough for our little ape brains. You know, I remember when I was young, back in the day, 20, 30 years ago, whatever it was, I saw the world in very black and white terms. There was right, there was wrong. I was a knight in shining armor. I was going to go chase down the forces of evil and punch them in the face. It was going to be great. And over time, I started seeing why the world is so jacked up and so complicated, and why it's so hard to get anything done. And, you know, through that, I feel like I've kept my morals and my ethics and stuff, but my relationship with rules has certainly evolved a lot. And there's this thing on the internet, like, I think it comes from Dungeons and Dragons. If you want to nerd out, you're listening to this podcast, you're already a nerd. You might as well buy in now.
Yeah, but like Dungeons and Dragons nerd, Jim? I'm a nerd, but I can't tell you a whole lot about
not that kind of nerd. There's a thing called
D&D, you know? Like,
yeah. I see that 12-sided die back there in your office over there.
You certainly don't. If you do, it's one of those sex die that's like one's got like a position, one's got a location, and yeah.
So speaking of that,
not that I have a set of those at all.
So speaking of that, where I'm going with this is there's like the alignment chart of like, you know, fundamentally what your personality is like. Are you lawful and good, or are you lawful and evil? Are you chaotic good or chaotic and evil? Are you neutral good, neutral evil, right? You know, what's your relationship with rules, and are you fundamentally aligned to be a net positive in this world or a net negative in this world? And I think over time, I have kind of grown to be kind of a chaotic good. Like, I'm trying to do the right thing, and, you know, when the rules cooperate, then I follow them, and when they don't, I ignore them.
Yeah, I think if you, in any of the professions that we generally talk about on this show, if you've been around long enough, you've watched things evolve. I mean, even in the medical world, there was a time that tourniquets were considered not a good thing. And now we regard tourniquets as life-saving and necessary equipment. The rules
as standard,
change,
if you will.
And so part of recognizing how and when the rules change with expertise and experience, you start to see that, like, well, there's a bunch of it depends, you know, and there's also a lot of rules just become sort of arbitrary, right? Like, a boss wants a desired outcome, and they're not necessarily, they're not looking at the process, right? They want to engineer certain results. And so they put this rule out there intending to do this one thing. And then the people at the practitioner or operational level go, wait, what, why are we doing this? And in our eyes, it becomes sort of like short-sighted or misguided or misinformed. And there's a little bit of disconnect, right? But with time and experience, you can also see where, okay, well, I could see why in certain situations those rules are really important. But when you have the experience and the expertise to see that, yeah, generally speaking, that is and should be the rule, but this is an exception to that, right? That requires that sense of insight and expertise. That's a big deal. And what a lot of this boils down to is like culture.
Yes.
And how you look at rules in terms of not only individually, like Jim is talking about the personality side of it, right? But when you're building out your team, how does your team enforce that stuff culturally?
Absolutely. And like, it depends, right? But the saying "it depends" is the beginning of the conversation. It's not the end. I need you to understand what it depends on, right? And that's kind of where we're trying to go today. Now, there are times when I want members of our communities to be really black and white and really by the book. And there are times where I need them to see some gray, right? Mike recently did an episode, I thought it was a fantastic episode, about discretion and officer discretion. The guy was going 36 and a 35. Do you give him a ticket and screw up his whole day, his whole week? Or do you take it as an opportunity to educate or intervene?
Have a positive interaction.
Have a positive interaction, right? Well, if you don't see yourself as having any discretion, the rules are the rules because they're the rules, and the rules are good because they're the rules, and I'm here to enforce the rules, gosh darn it, you're only going to have one type of interaction. And you're not really in a position where you can lead and influence behavior in a positive way, unless those rules are written amazingly. And let me tell you, very few rules actually are written that well. So in a military context, when I think about like different jobs where this changes, like my classic examples are the Air Force Security Forces airman, the Air Force cop that is guarding a nuclear missile silo. I want him or her to be really darn black and white, right? Either you've got the restricted area badge or you don't. And no amount of smooth talking or extenuating circumstances should like get you past that century. I don't want them to apply a whole lot of discretion. I want them to enforce the rules, right? Guard the nuke. Typically, I need Army Special Forces dudes, right? The people who wear green berets who are out there operating on their own in small teams, dealing with very nuanced cross-cultural issues and political sensitivities and ethical dilemmas. I need them to know how to work when the book doesn't cover the situation, right? And kind of classic example of that, like they've been working with the villagers for a couple of months. They're winning hearts and minds. They're sitting down, drinking tea with them, and things are going well. And then the villagers invite them to go like stone a woman to death. I need those special forces guys to be able to like, okay, let's work this out.
Hey guys, we're gonna go grab some beers and beat some woman. You want to come?
Yeah, I need them to see the gray there, especially if American national security depends on them being able to like
be cool with them.
Be cool, yeah. Right? And then pilots, who are of course the center of the universe. Usually, I want pilots to be like pretty darn by the book right up until it's time to like not be by the book. And when you deviate from the book, you're doing so at your own peril, right?
We see this in undercover work too, undercover and plainclothes work too. You, in that kind of environment, you will play in the gray at times because you are hashtag not a cop, right? But you are.
If you're not a cop, smoke this joint.
And here's where like this is probably a key takeaway of the episode, right? Because on one hand, I need people who can very comfortably know that they are in the gray and operate in the gray and be kind of like, well, this is probably okay, probably not. But at the same time, culturally within those units, there has to be very clear standards of, hey, these are the things that are absolutely not okay under any circumstances. I don't care what you're trying to accomplish, right? The end does not justify the means. There's a thing in policing, if you Google this term, noble cause corruption, right? And it's this idea that like, well, yeah, I lied to get us there. I did something unethical to get us there, but like he deserved it. And so it was the right thing to do. No, that's not how we operate around here, right? That's still corrupt. And so there has
training day.
Yeah, there has to be some bright lines where it's like, no, we are not going to, these are the things we are not, that are never okay to do, right? So you do need some bright line standards in that. And then there are things where it's like, okay, like if you're going, 7 or 8 miles an hour over the speed limit while you're driving with this dude, is that the end of the world? It's like, yeah, you're technically speeding, but so those are the things that on some level, like, yeah, you want people who can operate in the gray, but there does have to be a standard within those units where it's understood, right? Because that's a slippery slope and that can get dangerous real quick.
Oh, yeah. I like that phrase, bright lines. I think that's important. I think knowing your moral compass is really important. I think if you're in a job where you need to divest your signature away from your agency. If, for example, you are a undercover cop, I think you need to not look and sound and talk like a cop, right? Like that.
Sure.
That makes sense. And often that's specifically acting a little rebellious, right? And you'll see a theme throughout the military and law enforcement in the special units, undercover units, special ops units, SWAT units, whatever you want to call them. They tend to be a little bit rebellious. And rebellious is, I like that slippery slope term.
It's about what, right? Rebellious about what? The grooming standards? Okay. But
your mustache hairs are protruding past your lip line, and we can't have that.
Yeah.
So usually the most obvious way this manifests is literally over the grooming standards. So over dress and appearance. The dudes who show up, at least in the military, in beards and tattoos and board shorts are usually from the special teams. And that's become such a common theme that it's kind of a standard for that community.
There's a Jocko talks about this in one of his, probably a few of his episodes, but I want to say it's in the book About Face, which was written by...
There was David Hackworth wrote a book about Face. Yeah.
About Face, and I could be misquoting this. I could be totally wrong, but I want to say Jocko did an episode. He talked about Face, and one of the things that comes up in that book, I think, but the principle still applies, is like when your guys have stopped shaving, right? Like if you have a conventional military force that is otherwise uniform, they have grooming standards, uniform standards, all of that, and you're out in the field in combat type conditions or whatever, deployment, and your guys stop shaving, that's a sign of trouble. And there's a distinction here that we're talking about in terms of like mission set and the tasks and things that they do. But it's something to think about in terms of like what is rebellious, right? Like sometimes you want people to be lockstep and on the same page, and sometimes you don't. And that's kind of the trick here.
Yeah. And the dress and appearance thing in particular, for a lot of reasons, gets misinterpreted and misunderstood a lot. Gets misunderstood by outsiders, senior leaders, and whether they admit it or not, even within those special teams, it gets misinterpreted. So I kind of want to talk about that on this episode. Now, first off, let's talk about the beards, right? And Mike made a great point. In most of the military, when your troops stop shaving, unless they have a real good reason, shaving waiver, African-American hair gets ingrown, and unless they got something in writing saying, hey, don't do that, when your guys stop shaving, that's a big sign that like good order and discipline has broken down. And that's a huge red flag across the militaries when you have a break in good order and discipline. So how come the special ops guys do it?
First of all, Jim hates my beard. Okay,
because
so there's cool. That. I don't think he hates it as much as my tattoo, but
well, at the Air Force Academy, we didn't have beards or tattoos, right? Yeah. First off, Mike is a silver-haired fox with that gray beard. 1, 2, in SOF, in special ops, in theory at least, it's supposed to be about cross-cultural communication, right?
Blending with the locals.
Yeah, and not necessarily blending. Like, I'm not trying to look like them. They know I'm not them. I get it. They get it, right?
But it's kind of like that's a respect, sign of respect, sort of. Yeah, because they do it for largely religious reasons, right?
Yeah, it's I get it. That's what you're communicating to them, is I'm paying attention to you and I am tuned into you, right? Yeah. So in a big chunk of the world, and particularly the parts of the world that SOF does a lot of business in, the Middle East, your status as a man has a lot to do with your beard, or in some areas just your mustache, right? Depending on where you are in the Middle East. The locals tend to take you more seriously if you have a beard. They ambush you less if you have a beard, because like, ooh, those are not the guys to trifle with. That's the soft guys. They know that. They're not stupid, right?
Those guys, they got guns, but they also got a motherfucking radio.
Yeah.
Let me tell you.
And the beard also, especially in Mike's case, makes you look older, which is by itself sometimes a useful tool.
Because I otherwise look like I'm 12 without the gray hair. And,
I'm not some kid coming into your village to tell you how to live your life. I am an elder, and you will talk to me as such, right? Like there is some of that to be said. And it's a little rebellious. And that's okay sometimes, right? But guys mess this up.
Well,
the beard.
This is actually, I think on the rebellious thing, this is an interesting thing. Especially in like the special forces world.
Yeah.
Is that a lot of times in country, I think, I'm not a military guy, but my understanding, right?
I was recently in a country, so yes, go on.
There's very specific, like there are rules of engagement. And
true.
As I understand it, the bad guys respond to, like, they learn those rules and they will work around those rules specifically to fuck with us. It's part of that OODA loop thing, right? Is they learn when we can and when we cannot shoot.
Yes.
And so conveying a little bit of like rebelliousness is like, yeah, you might think you know the rules, but I'll break those. Hold my beer. You want to fuck around and find out, right? Like that is relevant in the kind of work that they do. When they're out there by themselves, it's, 12 guys in a village without a lot of support.
That is true, right? Audacity is a risk protection.
Yeah.
Right? It's a risk mitigation measure, and it's one that's tough to explain and tough to describe.
It's kind of that,
especially
it's
to
like
the
posturing,
colonels.
Right?
Yeah.
Like, it's like how the, what's the Jurassic Park, right? The dinosaurs that have the big fucking collar things that pop out. Or like when dogs, right? When dogs show their teeth and raise their hackles.
Yeah.
Right? They're trying to convey something to convince you that they're more prickly than maybe they really are. Right?
Yeah. That actually, I think, is an excellent point. But the thing is, like, guys mess this up. The beard is associated with SOF. And when I say SOF, I mean Special Operations Forces, right? The umbrella term for SEALs and Green Berets and Rangers and whoever the hell else falls under that umbrella. And so guys want the beard because it's associated with SOF, right? But the beard is just like the trappings of special operations. It's cool because special ops is cool, but it's not necessarily cool on its own, right? And maybe beards are cool on their own if you're into the hipster vibe and IPAs and
going for the mountain man thing,
yeah, the lumberjack, lumbersexual, whatever. Like, I realize that it's a style thing, but it is one fairly small aspect of the whole special ops mission set, culture, everything, right? So it's important to understand the difference between doing special ops stuff and dressing up like a special ops guy, right? Everybody wants to be gangster until it's time to do gangster shit. And that's one very small part of it. And as it relates back to the rebelliousness thing, rebelliousness is a trait that we tend to see, and it's a trait we kind of recruit for in special ops. And those units tend to look for it. And so they tend to reflect that a little bit, right? We need someone rebellious enough to look outside the rulebook to solve problems. We need someone who can handle a VUCA environment. VUCA is one of my favorite little doctrinal terms. VUCA is an acronym. It's a terrible acronym. It stands for volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. Sometimes you'll hear me say it as volatile, uncertain, chaotic, and ambiguous because I like the word chaotic. The problem is very by the book people don't handle VUCA well. It is incompatible, right? Very by the book people don't handle chaos well. But as with all traits, we need that rebelliousness set at a certain level. We've talked about this in other episodes, right? Like, I need you a certain amount of arrogant. I need you a certain amount of aggressive. Yes. I need you just crazy enough, but you got to be hot enough to justify how crazy you are.
Yeah.
Right.
And there's a zone that is wife material
Yep.
Party material and stay away from material.
The Vicky Mendoza line. Yes. So, if you're going to be crazy, you goddamn better be hot. Now, most applicants to a special operations unit, a selectively manned assignment, frankly, aren't value added enough to justify a stupidly high level of rebelliousness. Like, you ain't that good to be difficult to work with. Right. And that, like, you got to be honest with yourself about that. So I like to think about this like a scale of 1 to 10, right? 1 being 100% by the book all the time. Yes, sir. West Point with honors. Right. And then a 10 is like probably should be in prison. Okay. So,
or like a state hospital somewhere.
Yeah. Like I'm picturing like the Joker.
Yeah.
Right. Some people just want to watch the world burn. Right. So
what's his Hannibal Lecter? Yeah.
Yeah. So 1 out of 10. 1 being totally robotic by the book. The rules are good because of the rules. The problem is that guy, that number 1 out of 10, he's not real useful in most teams, frankly, and certainly not in special ops or the special teams, right? Because he will tend to put the rules above the mission and the rules above the people. Have you ever met that type of person who's like, oh, yes, rules?
Yeah, one of my favorite examples of this. So impaired driving investigations are fairly technical because they are very aggressively defended. Judges get them, cops get them, firemen get them, teachers get them, doctors get them, right? And they're one of those things that are a good reflection of judgment. And so to get those right, because of how well they're defended, there is a lot of technical stuff that goes with it, right? And I've met over the course of my career some traffic enforcement type guys who are very like, well, according to Arizona revised statutes 28 like, and they will go out and they'll hammer guys on technicalities all day long. And is that making people safer on the road? Is that influencing the behavior of drivers? And in the case of like impaired driving investigations, just as an example, like the tiebreaker always goes to the defendant, right? We live in a country where like you need to recognize that like hammering, like hitting someone with a DUI charge might really impact their lives and their careers and whatever else. And if you are not sure, right, like you have to be very careful about just arbitrarily pulling someone on a technicality. And this is the type of thing that I see a lot with traffic enforcement stuff where community policing and building trust and credibility with the public has a lot more to do with relationships than rules. And there's like that like reasonable person standard where it's like, what does the public expect of us? Is it to write the guy the ticket for 36 and a 35? And this is where like having that guy that is just like, well, any little thing, if he's breaking the rules, if he's over, if he's, at all, I'm going to just nail this dude to the cross. That can be problematic in a sense. And recognize how that could be problematic. Imagine in your job, you do one little thing wrong, and every little thing that you do wrong, someone's after you, like writing you up or giving you a ticket.
A rules crusader is exhausting.
Right. It's just like, that's not like you're overdoing it. Right.
And my experience is those people often, but not always often, really love enforcing the rules on other people and really don't handle getting the rules enforced on them very well. That's my personal experience with that. So the 1 out of 10 super rulesy guy will tend to put the rules above mission and people, and that's a problem, right? They will follow bad rules off a cliff. They will interpret the rules more strictly than they actually are. And so, for example, in a military context, if he's doing close air support, he's an A-10 pilot or whatever, and he's at the end of his Air Force assigned crew duty day, he will head home instead of protecting the troops because, hey, the rules said so. Well, there might be parts of the military that need to be like that, but I don't want to be in those, honestly. So think about like a 2 out of 10. A 2 out of 10, a little bit more rebellious, but not much. They're not going to show much initiative. And there are certain jobs I need a lot of initiative, right? They will tend to wait to be told what to do. They will ask permission. They'll say, hey, I see this guy running away from me. Hey, patrol sergeant, do you want me to chase him? They will say things like that. Which gets you really slow decision cycles, right? And garbles up your radios. And they aren't going to challenge bad rules or bad practices. Sayings you can expect from them are like, well, that's the way we've always done it, or better safe than sorry. They'll say things like that. And, that's fine in a lot of agencies. Like, they will fill the seat. They will take their paycheck and they will check the box. But that is not someone I want on a SWAT team. That's not someone I want on the hostage rescue team. That's not someone I want on, the Special Forces, ODA, A team, anything like that, right? So what we need most of the time is somewhere in the next couple of, integers on this scale, right? I need a 3, a 4, a 5, something like that. Someone who isn't going to follow stupid rules, who will point out stupid rules, someone who won't follow a bad leader, or will challenge at least that bad leader and be like, hey, that's dumb, different, and dangerous. We really shouldn't do it, right? I need that type of assertive follower. And honestly, in most cases, like a 4 out of 10 is probably plenty on that scale of 1 to 10. 4 is probably pretty good. A 5 out of 10 is probably a pain in the ass to work with. Like, they're busier challenging the authorities than doing their jobs.
Contrarian. Yeah.
Yeah. Have you ever worked with that person who, like, they show up late, they won't wear the goddamn uniform the way we told them wear the goddamn uniform just because, right? They're either lackadaisical about it or outright defiant about it. And either way, it just makes everything take longer, and like, we got to spend time to unfuck Timmy over here.
I'm probably in that 4 to 5 range.
Yeah.
If
I'm being honest. Yeah.
I'm probably that guy.
Yeah. We get much past 5, though. It starts being like legit problematic, right? A 6 or a 7 out of 10 probably isn't functional on a team, right? They won't get with the program. Whatever the program is, they won't get with it. So you got to watch out for those people. They will do things that are dumb, different, and dangerous regularly. A guy who's an 8 out of 10 is probably trafficking narcotics. Right? He probably has like a human trafficking ring working in the background, and is probably not someone you want to share a foxhole or a life raft with. Maybe a weekend in Vegas, but no more, right? And a surprising number of special operations teams over the years have gotten this wrong. They have recruited this guy or allowed this guy to fester and grow on the team. And there's been a string of arrests and a string of murders in the special operations community in the military. That's no bueno, right? We're supposed to be the good guys. We're supposed to fight the demons, not become the demons.
Bright lines.
Yeah.
Bright lines.
Right? And so understanding, like, what really are our ethical standards, right? It's one thing if we're lying to the enemy. It's another thing if we're lying to our own commanders, right? It's another thing if we lie in our own debrief about how that went, right? So that's important. And if you ever want to look into that, look up the U.S. SOCOM did what they called a comprehensive review about a series of good order and discipline problems happening across SOCOM. The review itself is available, public knowledge. It's just very, very... How do I say this?
Dense?
No, kind of the opposite of that. The publicly available document is...
Abstract.
Pretty abstract. pretty vague. It's like,
Bullshit.
there's been some problems, and we're gonna look into them. Is how I describe it. But it gives you a baseline. So if you look up SOCOM comprehensive review, like you can see what SOCOM, at least you get a feel, right? Or you could look up like murders special forces or murders Navy SEALs, right? And you can kind of see some of the examples.
I was in a room one time recently, actually, that someone asked a question of a senior leader, and the response was, "Well, that's a moving target." Like, that is not an answer, sir.
It's a non-answer. Yeah. That's a guy who can work in the gray. Yeah. I like it. So where I'm going with this, and the beard is one example, and special ops is one example, right? Not everyone who listens to this podcast is going to be a SEAL or going to be a special forces dude or whatever, right? But where it applies to you, whoever you are, dear listener, is I want you to be thoughtful about your standards in your unit. Whether that is your patrol division in whatever county sheriff's office or municipal PD, whether that is your security forces squadron at the Indiana Air National Guard, whether that is, your shift at McDonald's, honestly, like, think about what are your standards? What really are the standards? Why do you have those standards, and how do you enforce those standards? That's kind of the point here, right? What are your bright lines? A standard, and the definition changes depending on context, right? In the Air Force, we have a very specific sub-definition of standard. A standard is a baseline of performance or behavior. It's meant to help create some minimum expectations and to make us predictable to each other. Right? Your tactics should appear random to the enemy, not to your partner, not to your co-pilot, not to the other guy in your formation, not to your wingman. It is so that you know, and so that the new guy has some idea of what to do, right? Think about like etiquette rules, like what fork you use first. So if you go to a state dinner with the president or the queen or whatever, you know which fork is for your salad and which fork is for your entree. That's a standard, right? If the guy in front of you going through the door cuts right, you know whether or not you're cutting left, right? Standards are critical to interoperability, right? That's why there's like ISO 9001 standards. Like there's a certain way that data gets moved. There's a certain way that data gets labeled and stored. And that's both physical standards, like common radio frequencies, common encryption, procedural standards, or procedural standards, like where to meet up if we have to do an emergency egress of a plane. Right? In military flying, usually standards are meant to speed up a briefing. So if I'm always going to egress 300 feet off the nose of the plane, and we even have that written down in like a standard operating procedure, an SOP, then I don't have to brief that every single time. I can just say egress will be standard, right? And when the plane is on fire and filling with smoke, that's not a time I want everyone to just wing it. Right? That's when I want to kind of standardize. Everyone knows where we're going so that when I'm counting everyone who was on the plane, they're all standing in the same spot, right? In close air support, if the JTAC, the ground controller who calls in the airstrike, if he wants to pre-brief a game plan for the close air support that he wants, and he knows that if he's in a gunfight, he's always going to start with 2 Hellfires in contact fusing, he can put that in his contracts. He can put it on a slideshow, right? His concept of fires for the con op. And then if he gets in that gunfight, instead of having to rattle off, game plan as follows: type 2, bomb on target, 2 by Hellfires, point detonate. Instead of having to rattle all that off in the middle of an ambush, he can say, hey, game plan alpha, execute, right? And I know what he wants, and he knows I know what he wants. Sometimes in the Air Force, we call that a standard. Sometimes we call that a contract. But one way or the other, it's a mutual understanding of exactly what he wants me to do, right? On the interoperability thing, consider the impact of your standards on your customers, your supported forces, and your partner forces, right? And think about this as far as like doing everything your own little way. Oh, our team does it this way. Like, that's cool. But just because you're unique or special doesn't mean you're useful. Other people have to be able to work with you, right? So when you're room clearing as a SWAT team, if you have your own very unique way of doing that, if you have to room clear with the patrol guys, can they work with you? Mike, do you have any insights on that?
Yeah, it's mostly just recognizing if I know when I'm with my guys that we're all on the same page, and because I know these are not our guys, I'm going to take those extra moments, right? Like those extra times. And the key in everything as it relates to this is what you said about he knows that I know what I want or what he wants, right? Like that is the thing about it, is like, do we both know that we're on the same page? And I mentioned this, we talked about I did an episode on the DC Beltway snipers, and we talked about interagency stuff. And one of the things that came up in that was, if I've got to like slow down, like if I'm talking from one guy to another between two agencies and he drops like a 10 code on me, and it's like, we have different 10 codes. I'm like, wait, what's a 10, whatever. And I know, like, okay, hold on, now we got to slow down and talk about those things. It slows us down, right? But I know I'm talking to a county guy or a state trooper or a fed, and I know that it's going to be different. And the key is just recognizing and knowing the difference. Like the key is just like being intentional about it and being like, all right, we need to take that extra moment and make sure we're on the same page. And if I'm the benefit of working with my guys, like my teammates, is that we can speed all that up, right? And so as long as you're like deliberate about we are on the same page or we don't know if we're on the same page, I think that's probably the big thing.
Yeah. Another, understanding supported forces or partner forces from a performance standpoint, understand what your customer actually cares about, right? So say I'm a passenger on a C-17. Do I care how long the sideburns are on the pilots? No, not even a little bit.
Totally.
I couldn't care less how long their sideburns are. You know what I care? Did the plane show up when they told me it was going to show up? Did it get my ass out of the country? That's what I care about, right? So a little empathy for like, what standard does your customer actually care about? Punctuality is a standard customers care about, right? Sometimes it is the level of polish that they're expecting, right? Down to the format of your PowerPoint presentations. That might sound nerdy, but if your concept of operations, your ConOp, is a PowerPoint slideshow, which it almost always is, I'm expecting to see certain things on that slideshow that tell me you know what the hell you're doing. Remember that OODA loop thing, right? Our training doesn't just tell us what to see, but where to look. Well, I fly with your concept of operations. I fly with your concept of fires slideshow. like it's printed out, it's sitting on my lap. And so I know where to look on your slide for the information I need to fly my airplane in the dark, right? And if I have to dig through your slides because you decided to like get creative with your slidesmanship, that slows me down. It sounds stupid and queepy, but that's the kind of thing that adds fog and friction, right? Often when I talk about standards with like bros and coworkers, physical performance comes up a lot, which is funny because we're in the chair force, but in the increasingly, like in the military, we take that very seriously. We have a minimum standard we expect everyone to meet, right? So that PT test, what are we setting that standard against? Most people in the military, I think, agree it's important to have a standard. We don't want to be a bunch of unfit slobs. But what are we shooting for? Where does that standard come from? Is it overall health? Is it the ability to carry a wounded buddy out of a kill zone? Is it like on a fire department, is it the endurance to climb 100 floors on a skyscraper with a fire hose? You got to understand, like, what are we basing that standard in? I think that goes a long way toward the credibility of that standard and the compliance with that standard. So we mentioned the beard thing, and we spent a lot of time talking about dress and appearance. Why? Why is dress and appearance such a big deal? I'd like to say appearance doesn't matter. Don't judge a book by its cover, but guess what? Universally, around the universe, it's usually the first thing people notice about you is how you look, right? There's a lot of unspoken communication in your dress and appearance. And Mike brought up a good point, like that I have a beard and I'm a soft guy, and like I might kill you. Like that is communication, right? It is also absolutely part of the brand identity of a lot of military units and also a lot of law enforcement agencies, right? The problem is sometimes the uniform stuff can get really subjective. Back in the day, I told a guy he needed to shave his unibrow. And he filed a formal complaint against me. He said that I was picking on him, like singling him out. I don't know. I was trying to help him. And you might want to set a standard like, well, just don't look like a slob. Well, that's a good baseline. But again, my definition of slob is different from Mike's definition of slob. So how detailed do we need to get with that? So when we think about that, when you set a standard, what you're really setting is a rule. It's important to understand it as a rule because as soon as you set it, you're going to have to enforce it.
Well, if you're going to have to, or if you don't, there's consequences there too.
Yep.
Right? If you have rules and don't enforce them, that is also a culturally relevant potential problem in your team or your organization.
Yep. So if you really want people to comply with a rule, the rule has to be clear. It has to be credible. It has to be enforced often enough that people believe they will be caught if they break it. And the consequence of breaking it has to be steep enough to make it not worth breaking. There's a lot in what I just said. Let me say it again. If you really want people to comply with a rule, it's got to be clear, credible, enforced often enough that people believe they're going to get caught, and the consequence has to be steep enough that it's not worth breaking. Okay? So take a speed limit, for example. That's a standard, right? Other cars are expecting you to go a certain speed. The stoplights are timed, in theory, for you to be going a certain speed. What happens when that speed limit is set arbitrarily low? Do people follow it? Well, it turns out some do. Some people will follow it off a cliff.
And we hate those people.
We hate those people. And most don't, right? Arbitrary rules lose a lot of credibility. And if you become the town that is like the town that has all the speed limits set stupidly, like all your rules are kind of ignored at that point, right? What if it's, separate from speed limits, what if it's an unofficial rule that one guy just made up? Like just some random guy on your team is like, yeah, that's not how we do that. We do it this way. Has that ever happened? Oh, yeah. That's fine as long as it's not like enforced like a rule. It's a preference. It's a technique, but it's not a procedure, right? What if it's a rule that no one understands? If you write a rule for sideburns in some technical language, and I shit you not, I got an email about this back in the day in the military. The hair on the sideburns shall not protrude below the tragus. You are relying on your audience to know and care what the hell a tragus is. That's your trivia question of the night. What the fuck is a tragus? Okay. There are some rules that are 100% enforced with 100% odds of getting caught. And there are some rules that are never enforced or almost never enforced. Okay. Also think about consequences. How steep does the consequence have to be? If I fail a PT test, am I off your team? Are you going to kick me out of the agency, out of the military? If my hair is touching my collar, are you really going to put a note in my permanent record? Right? So the probability and the severity of being caught have to make some sense. And this is fundamentally a matter of leadership. You are trying to influence your team to be a certain way, to look a certain way, to perform at a certain level, to interact with partners and supported forces and customers in a certain way, right? To create a level of predictability. Those are good things. And you may not get to write all the rules, but you 100% have a say in how your team approaches rules and how you enforce them. You get to set the culture as it relates to rules, right? So, neat example of this. A while back, I was working with an air unit that was dealing with a really tricky boss, right? Very intense boss, very by the book. And this was a unit that wasn't very by the book, right? Lots of discussion about why the rules shouldn't apply to the unit. He challenged them right back and he said, well, okay, fine. Well, what are your rules? If you don't follow the big rules, what rules do you follow? And that led to some stammering. And this came to a head at a stop overseas. We stayed at a hotel overnight and we were going to get on a bus to get to the plane to fly home, right? So there was a set bus time when you had to leave the lobby of the hotel and get on the bus and go, right? And we have a saying, certainly in the Air Force and in air crew, we say bus time is bus time. It's a literary foreshadowing. You have an absolute responsibility to make it to the bus on time. No matter what debauchery you're involved with the night before, get your ass on the bus on time, right? That's the rule. And that is a standard. I don't know if it's written down. Well, it is in the UCMJ, but you don't want to go there, right? Well, sure enough, someone didn't make the bus. We held the bus for the late guy. And you could just watch that boss get madder and madder and madder about that, right? Now, there are two sides to that coin. We are humans. Shit happens. And getting left by yourself overseas is uncomfortable on a good day.
Kind of a big deal.
Missing your airplane, which, by the way, is a missing movement, which, by the way, is a UCMJ literal, like, chapter and verse issue. That sucks. That's a pretty steep consequence, right, of missing bus time. On the other hand, bus time is bus time. So say you're the troop commander, you're the trip commander, whatever it is, mission commander. What do? How long do you hold the bus? 0.0 seconds, because the rules, because we set the rules. Bus time is bus time. Off we go.
Yeah, right? Like the guy's walking up and you're like, nope, sorry, dude. Give him the finger.
Close the door on him. Fuck off. Right? Do you hold it for 1 minute, 5 minutes, 10 minutes? Right? What do you do to the guy who missed bus time? So when he does show up, however he does show up, what do you do? Do you throw the book at him? Because you literally can. At that point, you can, like, that is several.
He did fuck up.
Yeah.
Right? Like,
absolutely. Right? And that is several black line rules. Right? Does it change if the guy who was late was really high ranking or really low ranking? You know, an E1 airman versus like an E9? Or an O1 versus an O5 or O6, right? Does it change if he has a pattern of showing up late? right? He's one of those 5 out of 10 guys who's just always fucking it up. What if he has a really compelling excuse? Hey, I was in a car wreck. Right? Does that change it? Or are you like, no, bus time is bus time. Ha. Right? I don't have a great answer for you on that. It depends. But I want you to think about that before you set a bus time. Because as soon as you set a rule, that's your problem, right?
And whether you're going to install a buffer there, right?
Oh,
if
yeah.
You're going to tolerate a little bit of gray. Like, okay, we're going to say 1800. We're actually going to leave it 1810.
Which drives other people nuts, right? Like, so there's trade-offs there too.
Yeah, sure. But I'm just saying, like, if you just say that, like, all right, if it's accepted generally, like it's a soft 1800. But if you're late, it doesn't mean that culturally we have to be cool with that. But it's just like, what the fuck, dude? Oh, nice of you to show up, right? Like, you can still give that guy some shit. There could still be some, right? But culturally within the team or within that organization, it's accepted that, yeah, we're not going to hose you, but you're still going to be held accountable, right?
Yeah.
You're still going to get called out.
And you got to factor safety as the troop commander, right?
Right.
And you can choose to be a hard ass about everything. And there's certain units that are all about that life, right? And that sounds enticing to quite a few leaders. Like, I know a lot of people who, when they are going through their commissioning source, when they're going through their advanced professional education, they are all about being a hard ass. Oh, we got standards. We need to have some standards around here. But what's the cost? Well, then you have to be a hard ass about everything. Now that boss made an issue about the guy being late to bus time, what happens to the boss the next time the boss is late to an event? Should the unit look the other way? Will the unit look the other way? Probably not, right? So you ride the tiger, you might end up inside the tiger. So about performance standards, I was trying to think, like, what's a good example? Law enforcement, military, cross domain. I was thinking about shooting standards, right? Mike, is there a minimum shooting standard to be a police officer in your agency?
Yeah, I mean, there's a state qualification standard, and then we have additional
like
ones to be
standard. Okay.
On SWAT, firearms instructor, etc.
Okay. So let's say, hypothetically, we set a standard on our team. You have to shoot 5 out of 5 on a 3x5 card in 5 seconds from 50 meters with your service pistol. That is our standard. Okay. Okay, cool. Hooray. We have standards. Tough standards. Standards are good because they're the standard. So question 1, what is driving that standard? That we have to be able to shoot a 3x5 card 5 times out of 5 in 5 seconds at 50 meters. Is it just we pick those numbers because they sound good? And maybe it's legit. Maybe you do high-end hostage rescue and you've got to be able to make that brainstem shot to save the president. Okay, cool. Great. Most units probably don't need to hit that level, and the juice is not worth the squeeze to get there, right? So you got to ground your standards, your performance standards, in reality a little bit, okay? How are we communicating that standard? Is that standard written in a manual? Do you tell people up front that they need to meet that standard? Some organizations make a point of never publishing their standards. And the idea being that they want the people who can handle VUCA, right? Volatile, uncertain, chaotic, or complex, ambiguous situations. That's cool if you're, building the Omega Force in SOCOM or whatever, but if you're going to do that, do it purposefully. And maybe not all of your standards need to be a secret, maybe just some of those standards, right? How are we supporting that standard? Are guys expected to walk through the door shooting at that level? As a sign of like their preparation and raw talent? Or do we build them to that standard? How are we resourcing to that standard? If I need you to shoot at that level all the time, how many rounds a month am I buying for you? Or do I expect you to just resource that on your own? Okay. Next is, how are we enforcing that standard? Do we do an annual qual? Okay, it's January 1st. Everyone get online. We're doing it. Okay. Maybe we end every daily training session with that drill. If you ever fail, you are off the team. Maybe it's a threat of a pop quiz. Hey, at any point, we might throw up a 3x5 card and expect you to hit it. What do we do when someone fails? Do we kick them off the team? Do we give them one chance at a requal? Do we put a black mark in his permanent record? Or do we dust them off, do some remedial training, and, fix it? And then what do we do with someone who keeps failing? How much failing is too much failing? In terms of not meeting the standard. And again, this is one of those, it sounds good to be a hard ass. Like, hey, the standard's the standard. You better make it, right?
So you have to kick off the guy that's a good dude and a good teammate, and he just had a bad day. Or he has one very unique skill that has nothing to do with shooting, but you really need him, right? Or you can't staff your team. You need 12 guys to make the team work, and right now you've got 3. Mm-hmm. Has anyone ever lowered standards in order to meet production? Yeah.
Yeah.
Google law enforcement 2024 hiring standards, and you'll see.
One of my pilot training bases was the Navy base. They had a sign up on the wall, "Quality is the enemy of production." I always thought that was good. So, what I think you need to know about standards, right? I want you to sit down and I want you to dedicate some brain bites to your own unit, your own situation, and sort out what the big red line, bright line standards are, what their baseline, what they're based on, how you communicate those standards, and how often you enforce them and how severely you enforce them. You might be surprised. Some of your rules might be nonsense, and you might need to change them.
Totally arbitrary. Yep.
Some of your punishments might be so severe that no one ever enforces the rule. Some of your biggest rules might be a secret from the noobs, and you're setting them up to fail because no one wrote them down, because they're just an Indian legend passed from father to son, father to son. So that's kind of what I'm thinking about standards, right? We're interested in hearing your opinions on this. I'm sure every organization is a little different. It's one thing, if you're in a Marine Corps infantry unit or in a very delicate, undercover law enforcement unit, I'd be interested to see how you navigate this, where you set your bright lines. So if you're down for it, come up, hit us up on Facebook. We'd like to hear from you.
My only things on this, I mentioned some rules are just arbitrary, and I think it's worth, one of the themes on this show we've talked a lot about is challenging all assumptions. And ask yourself, where did this rule come from? Why is it a thing? And is it worth keeping? Is it doing us any favors, or does it need to be fixed or changed or modified or deleted? And understand that a lot of this is just a cultural thing, right? There's a big difference between the written and the unwritten. And to Jim's point about dedicating brain bites to think about this stuff, is be intentional about that. And try to look into what organizational behavior, how that influences things, how it affects leadership, and sit there and say, what are the bright lines? What's the gray? And try to define that. If you can codify bright line stuff versus gray stuff and say, this is where I'm going to give people discretion, going back to the episode that I talked about discretion a little bit, just as one example, it really helps to actually write that down and be well, what about this? What about that? And I think from a leadership standpoint, when you're trying to establish a culture and to uphold a standard, because we want high standards, we want high expectations, we want excellence. You've got to have those difficult conversations amongst your stakeholders and if you're a leader, yourself. So that's all I got.
I also think it's worth consider a little bit where you fall on that spectrum, like the 1 to 10. And, if you're a 5, do you need to be? And if you're a 1, do you need to be? Right?
Yeah, self-awareness goes a long way here, for sure.
And when you're recruiting and selecting and assessing candidates, like where really do you want them? Right? They might be really talented, they might be really hot, but are they too crazy? So that's all I got.
Everyone wants a unicorn, but
that's right. That's all I got. Thanks for coming out, and we'll see you on the next one.
All right, guys, that's all we got for tonight. This episode is brought to you by Drip Drop. Drip Drop Oral Rehydration Solution is an electrolyte powder that you mix with water. It was formulated by a doctor for quick absorption. I work in the desert, and it only takes a few hours in the heat, wearing body armor, carrying around a bunch of gear before I start feeling like crap and fall behind the curve in dehydration. Drip Drop keeps you in the fight so you can finish the mission and rehab for the next one. Go get you some at dripdrop.com or on Amazon, or ask your supply guy to find it for you. This episode is also brought to you by Palm Industries. I have maintained for a long time that pepper spray is a way underused tool in law enforcement, and I get it. When you have to arrest someone, you do not want to have to get that stuff on you. But in personal defense or concealed carry scenarios, you want to create standoff and increase the distance, not go hands-on. I can tell you hundreds of stories about confrontations I have been involved with in real life that were resolved with some form of less lethal long before a gun would have been an option. Why not carry some in your pocket? Palm pepper spray is small, easy to carry, and it's effective. If you need something in between harsh words and a gun, this is a $12 solution. It's available on Amazon, makes a great gift. Go check them out at palmpepperspray.com. That's palm, P-O-M, pepperspray.com. Don't forget that we put out new episodes on the 1st and the 15th of every month. If you like what we're doing, you can head over to Patreon, give us $1 for each new episode. That money's going to go back into bringing you good content. If you want to interact with us, you could find us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. We are at TacTangents. You can also email info@tacticaltangents.com. And one last thing, our Facebook discussion group. We've got a little group going on Facebook. If you go to the groups tab on our page, you can join it. We've got more followers on our page than we have in the group. So I know there's some of you out there following the Facebook page that are on Facebook that are not in the group. Lots of like-minded people in there. So come hang out with us. All right. That's all we got. Good talk.